Welcome to AFSPA Talks, a production of the American Foreign Service Protective Association with Chief Operating Officer Kyle Longton. Be sure to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast channel. Enjoy the episode.
This episode contains discussion of sensitive topics, including suicide and depression, and may not be appropriate for all listeners. If you or someone you know are struggling, please call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-8255. Hannah, it's our first podcast, finally.
Finally, we're here. I'm so excited, Kyle.
I'm excited too. We should probably tell people a little bit about ourselves and the podcast. I'm Kyle Longton. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at AFSPA, and you are?
I'm Hannah Wolfart. I'm the Junior Communications Coordinator at AFSPA.
And this is AFSPA Talks. This is a podcast that AFSPA is bringing you ideally 2 to 3 times a month. And our goal here is to educate members about health and wellness issues and also let you know what programs and benefits we offer to you, our members, to help support you. So, Hannah, given that this is our first episode of AFSPA Talks, and I'm hoping that we have some listeners from a lot of different backgrounds, including some who are not as familiar with AFSPA, we had a great suggestion to provide an overview of the organization. We are the American Foreign Service Protective Association, or AFSPA, and we were founded in 1929. And our most famous product is the Foreign Service Benefit Plan, and we launched that in 1942. Today, we welcome to our membership foreign service personnel, but also certain civil service direct hire employees from agencies that are involved mostly in the foreign affairs of the United States. So State Department, Department of Defense, USAID, and a number of other agencies, as well as any employees who are assigned overseas or to U.S. possessions or territories. There's full details on our website. I don't want to lose you, our listeners, this early in the podcast, but a little bit more about what we offer beyond Foreign Service Benefit Plan. You've got access to dental, life, disability, and long-term care insurance programs, some discount programs, legal, tax, financial, and other professional service consulting firms. And we're offering this podcast as part of our mission to provide unparalleled customer service to our unique worldwide population, as well as in pursuit of our vision of being a healthcare center of excellence and an expert resource to the entire federal workforce. I'm happy that we'll be able to host those experts on this program and get information to our members and others about topics of interest in health, wellness, insurance, and benefits programs. If you're not an AFSPA member and you think you might qualify, visit our website, afspa.org, to join. Membership is free and for life, and we're always happy to answer any questions you might have. Please, if you like the episode, subscribe, share, tell your friends. Let us know what you think on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. You can find us at AFSPA Cares or just by searching for AFSPA. And we'd love to know what you think. We're hoping, as I said, to bring this to you about 2 to 3 programs each month. Hannah has a great background, so all the success that we have, she is responsible for. I'm just going to be here talking a little bit about just guiding us through the discussion and learning as we go, which I hope you will as well. And our focus, we hope to tie each episode into either our monthly or annual theme or some special event that's coming up. And so our first program is going to take a focus on mental wellness. And part of this is because our theme for 2020 and now 2021 has been mental wellness leads to better physical health. It's also May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And we've also seen a big uptick in mental wellness and mental health treatment over the last year. So Hannah, how has the last year been for you?
Yeah, it's been a challenge. I mean, as I think it has been for everybody, just going from, regular life in the regular world to a complete lockdown and shutdown, having to stay inside the house. I think that obstacles definitely increased within the past year. And I myself have experienced issues with depression and anxiety and different mental health issues, and as those around me have as well. And I think COVID kind of increased those obstacles for everybody, which made it challenging. But thankfully, we have programs to help, as you're going to get into. And there's a way up and out for everybody.
Yeah. And I know that we've seen a greater need this last year. I know in my own life that the anxiety, the depression, I've been on a short fuse, and we've seen that with our colleagues and our members, that people who had this boundary between work and life, it's gone. There's at least not a physical boundary there. And you may have your partner home and they may be, like me, a loud talker. And so having a phone call is a challenge, and certainly a video meeting. Or you've got the kids home, and you're trying to teach them or keep them entertained while also doing your job full time, and you're pulled in a lot of different directions. And it's a big challenge. And I know it has been in my life and for a lot of our members. And you mentioned having to stay in the house. I think our members worldwide have faced a shutdown at one time or another. Some of them are still facing that, particularly overseas. And so treatment wasn't as easy to get as it used to be, or at least we thought that was the case. Luckily, we if there's one good thing, it's that this pandemic hit now when technology is so accessible. And we're doing this over Zoom, having our conversation. But I saw some stats, and we had a huge increase in the utilization of telehealth and telemedicine last year. It's over 2,000% increase in the number of members using that option. And we've also saw a trend throughout last year and continuing into this year that now 53% of our telemedicine claims are for behavioral health needs. I will say I'm very glad that people are having access to that care, and getting the help that they need. And if they're not, we're going to talk about some of the programs we've got to support them via this podcast. That's our goal, right?
Yeah, definitely. In giving out information to our members and to anybody who wants to listen, and letting them know that the resources are available to them, and all they have to do is, look for them, or in this case, they're given right to them. Yep,
absolutely. And we've got, if engaging with somebody over Zoom or another platform isn't for our members, we've got other programs to help. We have Able To, which is actually it's engaging with the person. It's got some online tools. We're going to talk about that in a later episode coming up. Also got some telephonic coaching, some online coaching, self-directed, that's available. We also have a program called myStrength, and that's one thing that we're going to dive deeper into today. It is self-directed. We have some basic stats about how many members have used the program. And in fact, we sent information out to members in December of last year about this program and saw more than 170 register in December alone. That more than doubled the utilization just last year. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about when members might want to use it, how it helps, how it works, and does it work, and why people are using it. So we've got a great guest to talk about that with, and she's been involved in shaping that as well as a number of other pieces. Dr. Julia Hoffman is a psychologist and the VP of Mental Health Strategy at Teladoc Health. And Teledoc identifies themselves. We've got a partnership with them, a company empowering people everywhere to live their healthiest lives. Julia is a licensed clinical psychologist who attended Stanford and got her PsyD in clinical psychology at the PGSP Stanford PsyD Consortium, and completed a fellowship at Yale University School of Medicine. She has a great background in working in the federal arena as well. She was previously the National Director of Mobile Health at the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs and a faculty affiliate at the National Center for Telehealth and Technology, which is a defense center of excellence. She's been at the forefront of technology, and we'll talk more about that when we talk with her, leading the creation, evaluation, and broad international dissemination of a lot of the technology-based behavioral tools. And she founded and scaled mobile development for behavioral health at both Department of Defense and VA, and has been honored for these efforts by former President Barack Obama, the U.S. House of Representatives, the Federal Communications Commission, the American Telemedicine Association, the American Psychological Association. And she was also recognized as a top 25 emerging leader by Modern Healthcare and featured as one of the 2020 Women of Influence by the Silicon Valley Business Journal. I first had the opportunity to meet Julia about 2 years ago when she was working for Livongo, which is now part of Teledoc, and we are very fortunate to have her with us today. So Julia, welcome to AFSPA Talks. You are our very first guest.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're glad to have you here as we're focused on mental wellness, and we'll have an opportunity to talk about technology as well as trauma areas of expertise for you. But first, I want to jump in and just talk about the last year, or really about almost now the last year and a half. Our members have always been ahead of many others and ahead of the curve in recognizing the need for behavioral health care and seeking it out. But our stats from last year showed that behavioral health was actually the only major treatment category, in which we saw an increase, a huge increase. We saw 20% decreases in something like inpatient surgery and a 22% increase in behavioral health utilization, depression, anxiety, and more. Can you tell us some more about national trends, both before the pandemic and since it has hit?
Yeah, it's been an incredible ride for the past year, in the way that the tides have in some ways shifted, and in other ways, we've just exacerbated themes that were already present. Prior to the pandemic, we had a massive mental health epidemic in this country, a suicide epidemic, a depression and anxiety epidemic, a burnout epidemic, an opioid epidemic. It sort of depends, however you want to slice it. We have mental health and substance use challenges that have been growing and growing and growing. And in fact, every other cause of mortality has decreased over the past 2 decades, except for those that are related to mental health concerns and especially suicide. So from that context, we had this massive event that we've all experienced together, of this global pandemic shutdown of all of our natural sort of services and routines, all of the things that keep us mentally healthy, including going to work, going to the grocery store. These are normal everyday people things that just keep us feeling like everyday people. And with that, we saw 2 things. Number one, a massive exacerbation of symptoms, meaning even people who were not experiencing mental health problems before really found that they were somewhere between stressed and sort of a subclinical, not quite officially diagnosable space, all the way up through really significant clinical challenges. So we also have people spending a lot more time at home, listless, and with somewhat less to do than usual. And that has also increased overall the amount of substance use. And so there's a sort of a cycle there where increased substance use, even if it's just a couple of drinks or something after work every day, sort of adds up over time and depletes people's natural resources. Simultaneously, our healthcare system had to refocus and shift to really be attending to what is most urgent and who really needs to be here right now, which ultimately was largely about COVID, also about diverting providers wherever possible to have them serve this massive need related to COVID-19. And so, anything in hospitals and healthcare systems that was not seen as either urgent, absolutely necessary, it was sort of put off. And so I think what you're seeing are absolutely aligned with the rest of the nation right now. I think what remains to be seen is what 2022 will look like. God willing, we're past all of this. We're back to some normal way of life, and back out able to do the things we would usually do. I don't know if what we're going to see is a huge amount of pent up demand in those areas like surgeries and stuff like that. What I can tell you from my own view, my own expertise, is we are for sure going to be living with this expanded mental health need for quite some time.
So, and I've been to industry conferences where they've talked about, there's the next pandemic is going to be mental health. But what you started out by saying was that, no, that's been here, that's been with us. And is it that there's a stigma falling away from it now, that people are seeking treatment, or has it just been exacerbated that much more over the last year?
Yeah, it's a lot of things. I think both of those things and then some. So first of all, we've just got more symptoms floating around. We've got people who are navigating, situationally based mental health concerns like grief. That's like trauma, right? These are things that have hit more of us in the past year. And I've been focused right now on COVID-19, but there's been a tremendous amount going on in the US broadly, including everything from, racially charged protests and the reactions to those and the reasons for them have been weighing heavy on much of the country. We've got political disagreements that have been there sort of in the ether. And so there's just a lot that has been weighing on people that may, in some cases, be new. There's also been huge amounts of new parenting challenges. There have been huge amounts of new sort of loneliness for, especially for older folks who may not have access to others while they were sort of waiting out the worst of the COVID-19 crisis. So number one, absolutely, we're seeing an exacerbation of symptoms, and that's just going to continue to need to be dealt with, because it turns out once you trigger some of these issues, they stick with you until you work them out. Sort of the only way out is through. In a lot of these cases, it's unpleasant, and you kind of wish it would just resolve on its own. And sometimes it will, and sometimes it won't. The second issue, though, the second issue, in terms of that mental health needs sticking around, I do think that there's been a reduction in stigma. I think that even in venues where you don't generally see people talking about mental health and stress, that it has been, absolutely featured and foremost in people's minds. And just the amount of conversation about it has driven a new acceptance, especially among some generations where it typically hasn't been as big of a piece of the puzzle. And then the final piece is, I have kids, but actually I remember this from when I was a kid. You get hurt, you fall down, you skin your knee, you kind of pick yourself up, dust yourself off, go inside, find your mom, and then start to cry, right? The reality is we are still wound so tight. This isn't over. And there are so many of us that are holding on to this sort of survival mode, which helps us, which is there literally to help us survive. However, it is not intended for long-term use, right? Yeah. And so as soon as we let go and breathe out, I'm waiting for the wave that comes with the small amount of relief and then the recognition of the additional layers of grief for what we've all just been through together or individually.
Now, you mentioned that there's new challenges with parenting, and that we're also seeing new challenges for children themselves. I mean, I've read things about suicide ideation appearing in children as young as 5. And we have seen a lot of questions and a lot of response from our members when we put out what guidance there is that we can offer about how people can help their children and adolescents who are facing these challenges and trying to deal with them. What are you seeing in these age groups? And is there anything that you could offer to parents in terms of, or even though the teens who might be listening, in terms of how to approach this with each other?
Right. Well, the first thing that I would say is, if we had talked about this a year and a half ago, I would have said to you, Kyle, absolutely, this is a massive problem that we're facing as a country, that, suicide is the second leading cause of death for children ages 10 to 18. That is crazy to me. And that's a relatively new phenomenon. That was not the case 20 years ago. And so there is a lot to unpack there, and that has been looked at by experts in the field, trying to understand what is driving this. Is it, suicide, actually, we understand to have some sort of contagion effect, right? So if you know somebody who has died by suicide, you are incrementally more likely to die by suicide yourself. And so you can see how it grows exponentially, just the availability sort of bias there. I know somebody, it doesn't seem that completely unimaginable. And that's what's happening to kids. They're also faced with violence of various other kinds. We've got this simultaneous, issue around mass shootings in schools. There's just a lot more available kind of scary context for children and teens now. So the fact that we added on to that social isolation that's completely age inappropriate, especially depending on, certain specific age groups. I have a 5-year-old. Her whole job, as far as I'm concerned, this year at school was to learn how to socialize. And she hasn't gotten that here at homeschool with me. So, we've got different ages it's going to be hitting differently. There is currently data that shows that there's been an increase in pretty much everything bad for children and teens. So self-inflicted difficulties like suicide, certainly, but also just self-injurious behavior that's not actually, so things like cutting, that kind of stuff have increased. The age at which, as you highlighted, the age at which those symptoms and thoughts are coming up is decreasing all the time, which is horribly, horribly upsetting to think about. And simultaneously, we're taking away all of the things that kids tend to use for sort of support, their regular schedule, all of the things. Ask any parent who's read any parenting book. They know the things that you have to do to keep kids sort of emotionally healthy. And that includes all of the stuff that we're not doing this year. So it's not that big of a surprise that kids are struggling. That said, in terms of what to say to teens or what teens or kids should say to others, I would say, speaking to the children and the teens, it's find somebody safe to talk to. Don't rely on social media. Don't rely on peers if that's your first thought. Peers are amazing, but there are some problems that actually fall into the category of adult problems. I know I used to treat teens when I was in clinical practice, and it's hard for teens to believe that adults know anything sometimes, but there are places where adults can be helpful. So find your helpful ones, whether those are people at your school or hopefully in your home. As far as what parents can do, recognize that the way that psychological symptoms look is different at every age, right? So with a 2-year-old, it might be fighting that you weren't seeing before, really sort of physical manifestations of what's going on inside. With school age kids, it can just be general irritability. It can be sensitivity that you haven't really seen before. And with teens, although it can also be those, I don't generally think of teens as biting anybody, but certainly the irritability could still be on the table. Withdrawal is a huge symptom. I know we're going to talk about PTSD in a little while, but as you mentioned, but even setting aside whether or not something is actually trauma, what you see, first of all, in most mental health conditions is withdrawal and avoidance. I don't want to open the mail. I don't want to, I feel like I can't do the dishes. I can't take out the garbage. And for kids, you have to translate that onto their experience and the stuff that they avoid. So I would say parents, be on the lookout for things other than just a direct conversation from a teen or a kid saying, I am struggling in this way, I need help. And then if you do get that message, then the worst thing to do is to berate or to minimize. And instead, at whatever age appropriate way, you can connect, collaborate, empathize. Those are the keys. It's providing a safe place to have the conversation that needs to be had.
I think that's great information, because it also helps remove any stigma that might be there for the teen or the child who's experiencing this, even if they don't know that it should be there. And it can also, it might be a struggle because parents might be dealing with their own challenges while trying to support their children who are dealing with their own challenges. So I think providing that open dialogue, just being open to it, is a great advice, and having that safe space, and not turning to peers if it's a child or a teen. Absolutely. You mentioned trauma, and this is an area of your expertise, and it's actually one of the things we talked about when you and I first met a few years ago, and particularly your work on post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. A lot of us think of PTSD as limited to the military, the active duty military, or the veteran population, people who've spent time in conflict zones. But in more recent conversations, I have learned from you, it's broader than that. So when we're talking about trauma, what are we talking about?
Yeah. So it's a great question, because I think that, you know, our field, psychology, evolves just like the rest of science, just like the rest of the world. And so, you know, people would be within their rights to assume that PTSD is a construct that's for military service members and veterans, because that is where it started, right? As combat fatigue. And then sort of the title evolved over time. However, at this point, it's very clearly recognized that trauma can actually be based on an acute event or based on chronic events, and it has nothing to do with military service. It just so happens that in military service, you're much more likely to be faced with real or imagined death or harm to yourself or someone you care about. So the technical definition of trauma is that you have to have something happen, something specific that counts as traumatic. I'll talk about that in a second. And then you have to have the symptoms that are resulting from that. So symptoms that you have now that you didn't have before that event. Now, how we define a traumatic event has also evolved, but essentially it's not something like, I had a difficult podcast interview. I was super stressed and sweating buckets the whole time. It was traumatic. That's not traumatic. That's just a bad day.
And should you be clear, that's not happening to either of us right now on this podcast. We're both fresh and relaxed. Yes.
Right. Exactly. So real trauma is about, you know, real or imagined death or harm that is meaningful, that comes from a specific event to you. So if I am viewing it, if I see someone I care about go through a physically harmful or is something like that event. However, there's also such a thing as sort of chronic trauma. So essentially what that means is you have enough, it's sort of aligned with the construct of microaggressions, right? In a completely different domain. It's a bunch of small things that add up to a limited resilience, a limited remaining ability to cope with highly stressful things that happen. And so, you know, people who live in really low resource communities, people who are part of marginalized groups may experience this sort of chronic low level trauma that ultimately adds up to essentially the same symptoms that we see in somebody who experienced some sort of an assault or a natural disaster that took away everything that they care about. You know, so it could be any number of things. When I think about PTSD, obviously we could go through the whole checklist of symptoms and, you know, mentally check off which ones fit or don't for any given case. However, looking at it more broadly, PTSD is a disorder of avoidance, period. So if you think of it as this kind of cycle where you've got this horrible event, and whatever that horrible event or events was, it changes your worldview in some way. It changes the way that you think about how safe the world is, how good the world is, how able to keep yourself safe you are, how able to keep someone else safe you are. And it makes this kind of really meaningful shift in something that feels really central to how you approach the world, how you think about the world, how you feel about the world. And so from that, you see that people will, number one, be hypervigilant. They're always looking for signs of something similar to happen again, or evidence that actually, that's right, I figured it out. I'm not as safe as I thought I was before my disaster happened. So the hypervigilance, and then simultaneously the avoidance of anything that reminds you of the trauma. So that could be things in your own head, like thoughts about the trauma, but it could also, or conversations about whatever happened. It could be avoiding actual sort of physical triggers like that may remind you of the thing that happened. There's always weird ones that stick. Sometimes they have to do with smell. One of my fascinating early learnings with service members was how much the smell of barbecue was sometimes a trigger for folks who were serving in more recent conflicts, because there's just so much barbecue food all the time that this specific smell would trigger, it's much more likely that than the things that we tend to think about, like, oh, fireworks may, trigger somebody to feel like they're under fire. Well,
the
fireworks
noise, the
actually,
lights. Yeah.
Fireworks actually, I mean, at least in my neighborhood, not that common, but barbecue, a lot more common. So it really depends. Sometimes it's stuff that you don't necessarily expect. And unfortunately, the third piece of this, which makes the other two much worse, is the constant intrusive thoughts about the trauma. So you've got these thoughts that keep coming that you don't want, that then you're trying to avoid constantly, and then that keep you hypervigilant and looking out for the next sign that you're really in danger. It's a cyclical problem, and the only way to break that cycle, well, I'm going to stop myself there. Some people do spontaneously resolve. So if you look 2 years out from a trauma, about half of people, depending on the kind of trauma, there's a little bit of differentiation, but about half of people will have just resolved through the passage of time. So I think that that's actually pretty hopeful in a way, is that you don't have to run out and get care if it seems like, one day you start realizing, actually, I wasn't thinking about that as much today as I have been. That's the sign that things are improving. But for the other half of people, really the only way out is through. So you have to, attend to all of the pieces that naturally you're feeling like avoiding. And it's to be honest, difficult process. It's not pretty. But, when I used to treat PTSD, I felt it was very gratifying work, because it's treatable, because you really can be pretty sure with the incredible psychotherapy technologies. And when I say technologies, I mean, not using technology, but actually the interventions that we use now, incredible data, almost better than probably anything else other than panic disorder. Yeah. So very treatable. That's the good news.
That is excellent news. But because you mentioned technology, I want to pivot a little bit to that and talk about what we typically think of as technology, and what we're using to connect now and to get this message out to our listeners. But from the very beginning of your career, you've been working at the intersection of mental health and technology. Can you talk generally about the evolution of mental health and behavioral health and the technology and apps around that?
Yeah. So when I started in this space, I was a full-time healthcare provider, seeing patients, over the course of a whole workday. And there are incredible psychotherapists out there. I think that my own internal metronome, I don't think that I was actually well suited to sitting quietly all day, every day. So it started with, honestly, it's like a necessity is the mother of invention, right? Yep. So for me, there were two key sort of things to recognize after, unfortunately spending, a million years in graduate school, and coming out a doctor. So the first was that it wasn't a fit for me temperamentally to be doing this all day, every day. The second was that a lot of the stuff that I was doing was very repetitive. You don't get stronger by reading about lifting weights. It just doesn't exist, right? You have to actually, to start with, you should read about it. You should figure out the do's and don'ts, right? Don't hurt yourself. However, at the end of the day, if you actually want to improve your strength, you have to start lifting. You have to start sort of doing that graded physical work. And psychotherapy is no different. There is a piece of it that's about insights and me helping you to see, Kyle, here's the thing that I'm seeing about your life, or here's my vision of your life worth living that maybe you're not able to see right now, that we can push towards together. But that's not most of it. Most of it is the boring practice work, just like weightlifting, right? And so that practice, what I was seeing was, there's no way that this is the most scalable way to do this. I'm spending all day helping folks to practice a finite set of things. And my undergraduate education had included symbolic systems, which was sort of a computer science and psychology kind of interdisciplinary thing that they only have at the one school, as far as I know. But I had that background to go back to and say, this has to be partially doable with technology. Now in 2021, this is a no-duh idea. Nobody's impressed with the creativity of that idea. Back then, it was a much more interesting thought. And actually, simultaneously to be having it, Congress had it. So Congress, in recognition of the enormous number of recent returnees from Iraq and Afghanistan who were in need of additional support they were not seeking naturally, for reasons associated with stigma or logistics, any of a number of reasons, they put billions of dollars. So Congress decided to put billions of dollars towards supporting the emotional health and resilience building for those recent returnees. And so, I started there in the Department of Defense, building for active duty service members as we tried to offer them the help that they needed without pushing them beyond what they were willing to do, and engaging in face-to-face care. Interestingly, we were trained, so we got this money from Congress, and then we had to figure out, okay, what are the best practices here? We're building a new field, so how do we do it? And we had to go to NASA, and NASA actually were the very first ones to deploy remote mental health care. They were deploying it to space, because when space missions fail, it's almost always because of interpersonal conflict between astronauts. So, which I joke, like, and now after a year in my home with my husband and children, I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Small space,
Yeah.
same people every day. Absolutely.
Exactly. So, we grew from there. So I was doing web and then games, because video games are so important in the service member community, and just understanding how to leverage game dynamics in order to provide that same sort of educational and practice opportunities for better mental health and resilience. And then moved on to mobile, because it turns out what is better suited. I think that every time I read about some incredible leaps forward in mobile technology, for example, I saw recently folks using their iPhones to do blood analysis in some parts of Africa where it's harder to get the right tools and stuff on site. That's incredible work. I have to say, what I have to do, what my field has to do, is much easier than that, because I don't need any biometric data from you. I don't need anything other than words and media and you inputting those same kinds of things. And so mental health is a really natural fit for, especially a mobile context, but really any technology, so that we can, and incredibly, because we started in 2006 and then have been sort of building ever since, in the context of Department of Defense and VA. I don't know if people know that those are the largest academic medical training opportunities in our whole country. The VA trains more mental health practitioners than any other type of facility in the country. And so, it's very academically focused. So we also have a ton of research, to the point where I have had the thought many times since this pandemic started, that I just feel so grateful that we spent a decade preparing for this moment, at least a decade, right? We were ready. We've done the studies. We know what works. We know how to get providers to move on things, which is its own sort of, there's a whole field of study called implementation science about how to get, that includes how to get providers to change their behavior. So we were ready for it in a way that I will feel endlessly grateful for, I think, until the end of my days.
Yeah, I remember a recent conversation. You said you're glad that if we're going to have a pandemic, it happened now instead of 10 years ago, when we weren't ready, when we didn't have this technology across all sectors of our lives, not just healthcare. Well, I want to talk about one specific app that is out there and that we have a history with for our members, and that's myStrength. And it is a mental health app, and I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more about it because you've been working on it. Our members have had access to it since 2016. You've had a history with it. And I will say that we over the last year, we've seen an incredible increase in the number of our members who have engaged with the app. We had more than 160 sign up in December alone following a single email from us to membership. So more than 700 people were engaging with it last year, and they were coming to it through seeking help with depression, anxiety, and stress, but also with parenting, with PTSD, with pain, and with, in small numbers, COVID-19, identifying that as one of the reasons they were looking for some support. So can you tell us generally about myStrength and what your history is with it, and how members can use it?
Yeah. So I'm so glad to hear about your utilization. I actually hadn't heard that piece, and that's awesome because the point is to provide the tool and then to have folks engage with it however they need to, and to supplement the rest of their care or to take a first step. So myStrength is a commercial tool that was around for over a decade at this point. Started as a freestanding company and then was acquired by Livongo, a company focused on chronic medical conditions, and now is part of Teledoc, which is the global leader in virtual healthcare. So we have continued to grow our scope. However, the foundation of the myStrength product is the same as ever, which is this tool is for people to self-manage their symptoms, whatever mental health needs they've got, whether they are small and they're just dealing with the stress of day-to-day life, which is all of us under the best case scenario, or if they're really significant and they have a diagnosable clinical condition. We have programming for 13 different high prevalence conditions. So depression, anxiety, insomnia, substance use, so you name it, that's all in there. And really we see myStrength as primarily a self-guided tool. However, success for us is really in two different buckets. The first is, do people's symptoms get reduced? So we look for people engage with the myStrength product, whether they are using our full-length program. So for example, I want to do a full-length depression program, or they could just be using sort of the bite-sized, snackable, in-the-moment coping tools for navigating difficult moments, or for keeping, doing a mindfulness practice, that kind of thing. So there are a variety of ways for people to use the product for whatever is a fit for their needs in their life. But regardless, one big outcome is we want them to feel better. That's top of the list, right? We just want people to feel better in this moment and going forward. But then the second outcome that we see as really successful is, do we help people who need mental health care engage in it? So we want to increase people's, I'm going to be a little psychologist here for a second, but self-efficacy for coping. That's probably too.
I think we can figure that out from the context. Yeah,
can figure it out. Okay, yeah. So we want people to, there's a vocabulary test at the end, so be ready. And we want people to feel, self-efficacy means I feel like I can do something. To feel like they can manage their own struggles, whatever they are and whatever the scope and size of them is. Second best is, if they need help, can we demystify treatment? Can we help them access treatment if they need it? Can we provide a sort of appetizer for those who need more, so that they can move on to the thing that maybe they were putting off, or they didn't realize that they needed, or they didn't realize that there was actually help for? We're all stressed right now. for some of us, that stress is actually in the domain, like it's risen to the level of an actual diagnosable condition, depression, anxiety, PTSD, as you identified, insomnia. These are problems that are really, really prevalent right now, even more than usual when they're, at least 20% of the population. So I don't even know what we're up to now. I don't think those studies are absolutely complete. It sounds like, 1 in 4 people with COVID are having ongoing mental health concerns following the condition. So even just from COVID itself, we're seeing an exacerbation. But in any case, we know that 60% of people who need care are not actually ever showing up at that first appointment. That was the problem we were trying to solve initially for service members, and it's a problem broadly in American society. Stigma is one piece, and I think it's the piece that we talk about the most, but there's actually just a huge shortage of providers. There are not enough mental health providers in this country to serve the mental health needs of our fellow citizens. And so, this is a way of extending care to those who, number one, may need it right now. It's always available on your own schedule, and you can use it in the way that you need to. It's very flexible. It's very personalized. And simultaneously providing you a sort of a gateway to additional care if you need it.
And I want to note that it is based on, and I think you touched on this, some evidence-based psychotherapy models like cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, and even mindfulness acceptance. And we had some people who entered myStrength simply for mindfulness exercises. And so it's got something for everybody who feels that they need that support.
I think that's right. I think I have such mixed feelings about where we are as a field in terms of digital mental health care, which is obviously where I've spent the past 15 years.
Yeah.
Because in some ways, we should let 1,000 flowers bloom. There are so many products available now, even just in the public facing app stores that, you can go on there. If you search for any emotion or brain related thing, you will come back with tens of thousands of options. And the challenge there is there's just so much noise, and the average consumer has absolutely no idea what works. And beyond that, they don't necessarily know what's really wrong. Is it insomnia, or is it stress, insomnia as a symptom of depression? Like, is mindfulness what I need, or is mindfulness just a comfortable option, and what I actually need is some real deep cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Or is it DBT, or any of the different sort of approaches that are all on myStrength? And so, because of our clinical team's really deep understanding of what a real patient, of what a real person with mental health needs looks like, that we take that and we say, these people are not experts in self-diagnosing or making their own treatment plans. Everybody's doing the best that they can. If you don't happen to know a psychologist like my friends do, who you can call and say, I need help, but I don't know where to start. Or my kid needs help, but I don't know where to start. Or I don't know if I need help. I'm just so stressed right now. Then, a lot of people are just out of luck. And so myStrength fills that gap where we are the digital front door. We're broad digital front door. We accept all comers. Doesn't matter if you're clinical or subclinical or what the problem is. We have these incredible sort of machine learning and AI-based algorithms crafted in collaboration with clinicians and scientists in order to direct you in the right direction. So you may come into myStrength saying, I've got an anger management problem. And we may say, hang on there, it's actually depression. Because sometimes, especially in men, depression can look like irritability and anger. So, we really have a tremendous amount of intelligence built into the system to make it as expansive as possible and make it kind of the easy button so that you don't have to navigate all the noise of the market. There are incredible products out there, but the noise itself is now the problem.
Excellent. And I will just say for FSBP members who are listening and want to check out myStrength, they can go to mystrength.com, select sign up, and enter the access code FSBP to get started. So, Dr. Julia Hoffman, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for taking us through, the last year and trauma and mental wellness and myStrength, all of it together in such a great way. We really appreciate this. We hope to have you back sometime in the future to continue our conversation about mental wellness. But for now, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much. And thank you for offering myStrength. I'm delighted to hear that it's been of use to you and your folks. And we are excited to continue to partner and just, keep pushing towards a healthier, more resilient world.
Excellent. Thanks again. Thanks again to Dr. Julia Hoffman, VP of Mental Health Strategy from Teledoc, for joining us today and for her discussion of myStrength. Once again, myStrength is available at www.mystrength.com and enter code FSBP. It is available to members age 13 and over. We have a number of other programs available for FSBP members. For a full listing, please visit our website at afspa.org and look for the 2021 FSBP brochure. You can find information there or by calling us at 202-833-4910 and speaking with a health benefits officer. You can also tune into another episode later this month where we'll be talking about mental wellness and the program Able To with Dr. Bill Gillis from Aetna. This has been AFSPA Talks, a production of the American Foreign Service Protective Association. Comments in this episode are not intended as medical advice. Questions about your health should be directed to a healthcare provider. All information offered in this podcast is meant to be educational. Should there be any discrepancy between information offered in the podcast and official plan documents for the Foreign Service Benefit Plan or other products offered by AFSPA, the policy provisions will prevail. Thank you for listening and be sure to subscribe to AFSPA Talks to catch our next episode. Please rate and review us on your favorite podcast app and share feedback with us on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Look for @AFSPA Cares. Thank you to Hannah Wolfhart for producing, editing, and mixing this episode, and we'll talk to you next time.